This video is brought to you by Patreon provider Dave. Hello and welcome. You find yourself checking out the Vortex Spitfire Gen II HD 5X. This is a, of course, 5X Prism that was graciously sent in by Patreon provider Dave. This thing comes in around $450 and weighs about 11.5 ounces topped with a Venom micro red dot. It's really not that heavy despite how big this thing feels. As far as the illumination goes, it's daytime noticeable. That's as good as you're going to get it, but because this is a prism with an etched reticle, it doesn't need to be as bright. To briefly talk about the reticle, I like the fine center dot, I like the donut around it, and I like the drops. They're easy to pick up and easy to read. That's basically it for this. There's not a whole lot we could really talk about with prisms in, just going over this reticle overview. But so far, it seems pretty good.
Alright, it's going to be kind of hard to see where we're going to line this thing up to because it's only 5X. But as you can see, I got that screw on top. And I'm going back and forth. There is some slop in the erector. Listen. Up, 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 down, down, down. Well, actually, vice versa. Up, up, up. Down, 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 up, up, up. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. Alrighty, let's see what the windage does. No real slop in the erector. Looks like it comes back pretty good. A little tricky with a small screwdriver in my hand, but all things considered, this thing tracks pretty good.
Erector slop is not all that uncommon. This is a $450 optic, and to many of you that's going to be very expensive, but I've tested $2,000 and $3,000 optics that even still have some erector slop. That far target is about 40 yards. This closer one's about 15 yards. So if you're wondering how well this image is going to look at closer distances, here you go. Now, granted, when I turned the illumination on, it did bloom out a little bit, but it was a little bit too bright given the downstairs environment where we're currently at. Artificial light can only get so bright sometimes, so down here the illumination seems a little bit brighter than what it's going to be during full-blown sunlight, but as you'll see, it's still noticeable. Going back and forth between these targets, it's a little challenging at 5X, but Vortex was at least smart enough to put the footprint for their micro red dots on top of this 5X Prism. Dave sent in his Venom 3 away, which you'll be seeing soon on this thing, as a matched pair, and it works actually pretty damn good. But as far as how the optics work on this, at these distances, it's perfectly fine. Obviously, it was a very overcast day when I filmed this, and guess what? You might be using this in an overcast environment, so there you go. One thing, though, is I didn't have my camera 100% lined up through this, but yet there you are, still with a fairly good image. The illumination during this overcast day is still more than noticeable. We'll be checking it out how it fares in bright sunny environments very soon. To see if I could possibly get a little bit sharper reticle or a little bit sharper image, I play around with the rear eyepiece. This is set up primarily so this way you can set up how sharp the reticle is going to be to your eye, but sometimes you could find a little bit of a sweet spot between getting the reticle 100% and the image 100% again for your eye. I get it as close as I can get from my current setup, and I'm very happy with how the image looks. The reticle is very sharp, the image is very clear. There is a little bit of scope shadowing towards the top, but like I said, I'm not 100% perfectly set up behind this thing. But guess what? You might not be either when you're using this thing. This power transformer here at 30 yards looks really good, just like we saw earlier inside the garage. But there is some chromatic aberration that pops up in the high contrast areas, mostly probably induced by the clouds. Now, as far as the overall field of view through this thing, we're given 23.3 feet at 100 yards. To compare this to the P4XI here at 4X, we're given about 27.5 feet at 100 yards, but it looks a lot more than that to my eye. Now, to compare this to another prism, one that I've already reviewed, the Steiner S432, which gives you a whopping 38.7 feet at 4X, and you can see just how much of a difference there is between these two. So if you're buying this Vortex for its field of view, just know that there are other options out there. To compare very quickly to a TA34, you're given about 36.8 feet at 4X, which is still considerably more than what this 5X gives you. Playing around here at the small bore range at my home away from home, you can see that we're given again at 50 yards a fairly nice image. We do notice a little bit of distortion on the edges, but it's very, very minor, and typically once you're past 100 yards, you won't even notice it. However, what happens if you really need a little bit better lay of the land and you want to get maybe a little bit faster behind your gun, you're going to switch over to this, a little micro red dot that's going to be mounted on top. I am, of course, talking about the Venom 3MOA dot. It's a fantastic little micro dot that I honestly completely forgot I reviewed many years ago and actually bought for a good friend of mine. It's a good little dot. It's very small, lightweight, and paired with this thing, I think it works very well. The 3MOA dot is pretty easy for the eye to pick up. They do offer it in a 6MOA dot if you want something that's a little bit bigger. I am going to be fully reviewing this again and comparing it to a Viper 6MOA dot, so you could see exactly which is going to work better for you in a role like this. The eye box on this is fairly limiting. It's a fixed 5x. What could you really expect? But we do have a pretty good view through it. Clearly, this being a second focal plane optic, because it doesn't need to have the reticle on the first focal plane, the illumination is visible even when you're way off the image. We do have some leeway forwards and backwards, but going side to side or up and down too much, you're not going to be able to see through it basically at all. But switching up between the Prism and the micro red dot is fairly easy if you just cant the rifle over and use your non-dominant eye with the red dot. Let me show you what I'm on about as far as how much leeway we have forwards and backwards on this thing. Going from exactly perfect to 1 pixel farther forward, you can still see we have a more than practical and usable looking image through it. 1 pixel farther back from where it's supposed to be from perfect, and yes, we see a lot more of the scope body, but we still have a very good looking image through it. However, once we get it perfectly lined up exactly where we want it, and we start shifting side to side and up and down, you're going to see it's really tight. So the exit pupil on this thing doesn't really seem that forgiving. And that's something that you're going to have to really keep in mind, because getting on this thing with anything less than a perfect cheek weld is going to be a little challenging. However, you could always go up to the red dot, but guess what happened with my Venom 3MOA, or at least Dave's Venom 3MOA? The battery died. And that's one of the reasons why I don't particularly like running just a red dot, because if you have a battery failure, it's completely useless. That's why I like prisms, or at least one of the main benefits to liking prisms or having a prism on your optic is because guess what? If the illumination craps out, you have an extra reticle that's still going to be there. The same thing with an LPVO, or at least having backup iron sights in conjunction with a red dot or holographic sight. As stated, the illumination here is still more than daytime visible and perfect for any sort of environment that you're going to have to deal with where maybe it's just a little bit hard to pick up the reticle on your target. Out there in the woods, more than clearly visible. And that's basically it. There's not a whole lot to really talk about with prisms. They're a very practical option. They've been in use around the world with militaries for decades now. And as long as you train around them, they're perfectly fine. This one offers some pretty nice features. I like the reticle. The illumination's more than fine. The eye box is a little tight, but it's a 5x. If this is the 3x, I'm sure it's going to be a lot easier to get behind, but the 3x does not have the same footprint as the 5x to mount a micro red dot on top. But with 3x versus 5x, you might not really need it. I've been playing around a lot with Primary Arms GLX 2X, and that thing, you absolutely don't need anything other than what it is, because it is a fantastic little combination as far as size, weight, reticle, and magnification. But we're not talking about the GLX quite yet. We're still talking about the Spitfire. And yes, $450 might sound a little bit expensive, but keep in mind, it's already got Vortex's great warranty. It's a 5x with pretty damn good glass, very decent illumination, and it's already got the mount built in for a micro red dot. So you're saving money and added weight with that fact alone. It also feels really good in hand. All the controls are solid and it feels just well built. So overall, this Spitfire HD Gen II 5X Prism packs a lot of neat features for, I think, a fairly good price, all things considered. I myself would still probably opt for an LPVO, but that's just my preference. You might be looking for a prism with a micro red dot, in which case I think this should be on your list for sure. Anyway, Dave, thank you so much for sending this in for review, and thank you all very much for watching. As always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.